Hello and welcome back to CloseMode, the enterprise sales show. I'm Brian Dietmeyer, CEO of Close Strong, and today I'm very fortunate to be with Jeff Lowndes, the sales enablement and learning lead at Snap. Welcome, Jeff.
Great to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me.
So this is what we're going to talk about today. You're aware of this, but nobody else is. But you and I were talking last week kind of about the evolution of sales training and you said a bunch of stuff that I feel is right on, and the industry's kind of lagging and even broken in some sense. So you talked about moving from majority of the work being on sort of teaching concepts to the majority of your work at Snap being on application. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. It's great to be here. We had a great conversation before. We should have just recorded that and called it a day. But
Exactly.
we'll try to talk about it again.
Cool.
I think some of the moves that I'm trying to lead in the programs I build out and the ones that our teams are building out is moving from a majority teaching model, which we're bringing people into classrooms. And I'm talking about live experiences. So I'm not really
Yes.
referring to e-learnings because I think they have their own place. But
Yeah.
whenever we're bringing people live together, whether it's virtually or in person, moving from majority teaching and information transfer to majority application. And so for the learning nerds out there, that's speaking to Bloom's taxonomy, moving up the scale from knowledge and understanding to application and evaluating. And it's a lot more fun for sellers because that's really what they care about in an adult learning space. How do I apply this? How does this actually change what I'm doing? It creates a little bit messier learning spaces. There's more facilitation work, but I think ultimately it creates better outcomes for the programs we're leading.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think about the evolution of sales training. It kind of moved into for all the right reasons, a scalable, process oriented. Like here are the steps. But it's interesting too because I was speaking with a global sales enablement lead a few weeks ago, and she talked a lot about in context learning, which is what I thought
Yeah.
about when you talked about moving to application. And it struck me that I think is the next frontier in going there. So, but you also mentioned that people wrestle with the application piece a little bit, and I'm wondering if you could talk about what you meant by that. And I think that's connected to change management in a way. I wonder if you can make the
Yeah.
connection there.
I can make a few connections, and I also just want to frame it in a different way because that words and framing are super important. When I talk about application, how I've been framing it internally is, hey, we want to have you actually do real
Yes.
work in our time together, and that's how I've been trying to frame it to my stakeholders and to like the people on my team. Hey, we're just trying to create more space where you're learning by doing work, and so we still have some teaching. Like for example, we rolled out a lightweight sales methodology. It was more on like sales competencies last year.
Yeah.
And historically, you may spend 2 hours just teaching about theory and maybe role playing a bit for the last like third of it. And instead, we spent maybe a fifth of the front, 20 minutes of this 2 hour session teaching about the theory and then moving people into peer to peer consulting, working on real problems, applying it and wrestling with it, like you said.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
yeah, keep going.
yeah. No, yeah, and so I was going to start to lead into talking about wrestling, like
Yeah.
what I mean by wrestling. But what were you going to say?
Well, it's what you made me think of is something we also talked about last time when we should have recorded it. But I call the 90-10 rule. In ye olden days, it was like 90%, here's the methodology, and then 10%, are we going to pull it through? And I feel like it's
Yeah,
flipping that upside down. And the thing that you just said, I think is important for people to hear. The learning part's still important. But if you switch the emphasis to heavy on in context application, it doesn't require so much learning because the learning is happening, during the application. Does that make sense? It lightens the load that you have to have on the learning piece.
yeah, yeah. I like to think of it. Learning is happening throughout, but the modality and the way in which we're trying to help people move up Bloom's taxonomy or other models that talk about learner progression and application, it switches.
Yes.
And it's also not a rule, right? Like there are some really complicated topics and really complicated things that do require more instruction initially
Sure.
before you can move to application. So let's be real. Like
Yeah.
I'm not talking about some new silver bullet, but But yeah, I mean, and when I talk about wrestling, we're not talking about how do you use Salesforce, like how do you navigate Salesforce. Those things are pretty straightforward, I think, and so we don't really need to like wrestle that much with
Right,
them.
right.
But I think when I talk about wrestling, when we're learning skills that require a lot of individual working out how to actually apply handling
Hmm.
objections,
Yes.
how do I apply this new sales methodology, how do I build an account plan and work on it with my client. That people have to take whatever you teach them and figure out how that actually gets done in their world. And so the question becomes, are they going to do that outside of your enablement space, or can we bring it into the enablement space to start doing that work in there? And I think as we've started to bring it more and more where we can into our enablement sessions and enablement space, people get more excited because they know they're going to actually do real work that's going to drive the business. It's a little bit more fun because we're getting closer to what people care about most. No one comes to a training because they like trainings
Right.
most of the time.
Right.
Yeah, and once again, we're just helping people close that knowledge transfer gap between hearing something for the first time and using it.
So
Yeah.
I'm curious, sort of clicking one level down, and you used objections as an example. So handling objections. So I'm going to go on that one. So I wonder when I'm thinking about these sessions that you're running, like how much how much of this is custom up front, where you're saying here's the common objections and here's some responses, and how much are you just using sort of a framework to have them come up with the objections and have them come up with the responses? Are you bringing a
Yeah.
lot of customization into it, or is it all happening real time?
I think the more we can have it happen real time is where I think more of like doing work in our sessions is going to happen. I
Right.
think sure, we do have maybe an example or two,
Sure.
or we have like a filler example if someone can't come up with something. But I think the more we can say, hey, here's the principles of how we handle objections, or maybe here's the framework, and we ask them to bring, a real live example that they've had in the past week that they want to workshop and work on how they're going to reply to, and then have them do the work with whatever framework on the actual thing going on. I think that's where the aha moments happen. And in the session we rolled out last year, we had a couple different like huge enterprise deals get through and get won. And part of the contributing factor, not the only thing, right? But part of it, they said, oh man, I had some of these light bulbs in that session, and that's what helped unlock
Wow.
the deal.
Yeah.
And so those things are exciting, right? And those are how you can start to have more impact, on the people you're trying to serve.
Interesting. And I know, and this isn't you grading your own paper. This is what kind of feedback do you get from participants? If you can think at a high level about versus like a general learning course versus what you're doing, how would you define the types of feedback you're getting?
Yeah, I think ironically, it's similar in a general learning course where you do theory and you do like some like more 30,000 foot level work before you go down to the ground level.
Yeah.
I usually get some positive feedback because people had a fun time and we make
Sure.
them engaging. And then I usually have some people that are not as engaged. And ironically, I think I've gotten similar feedback when we take this model where some people aren't particularly leaned in
Yeah.
and they don't get as much value out of it. But the people
Interesting.
that do lean in get a lot more value.
Okay.
And so for example, and just to whenever I listen to a podcast, I like to try to like actually have tactical things to take away.
Yes.
In that program I rolled out last year, I used a peer consultation framework. It's Liberating Structures is like the organization, and it's free like ideas on how to actually have real conversations, participative conversations. And we use the Wise Crowds Liberating Structure if anyone wants to look it up.
Great.
And peers brought problems, they consulted each other on them, and they came in with real solutions. The people that did that, man, they were so stoked because they actually figured out how to move their business forward.
Yeah.
And so
That's
a
so
lot
cool.
of good feedback.
Well, that you just started leading into where I wanted to go, which was for people listening, like high level framework. What's the first couple steps?
And so I'm trying to think about what level to hit at. I think from a program design where you're like pitching this to maybe your sales enablement leader, or if you're a sales enablement leader and you're pitching it to your executives.
Yeah.
I think the goal is that we drive the business sooner and more immediately, and everyone wants that. And so, hey, we're going to experiment with doing more of this work in the session. And I think the buy-in that you have to get is we will have less control over the specific topics and the conversations that we cater, right? If you
Yeah.
do a more traditional role play with preset examples or case studies, you can say pretty certainly what's in those case studies, what people are going to talk about, what the takeaways are going to be. And you have to let go of some of that, which is really hard as a learning and an instructional designer or enablement professional. And you have to let more open space for people to play with these ideas. And some of them may not have as fruitful conversations as the others. But the bet that you're taking is you're going to have more impact and you're going to see more healthy conversations than not with some prodding. And so that buy-in and being clear about those trade-offs with whoever you need to get buy-in on initially is key. And then I think if you're on the ground designing a program, it's really just asking the questions: what do they need to learn on the front end? And then how does a salesperson actually going to apply that? And what would it look like to create a space when we're together where they can actually do that? So maybe that's role playing and doing iterative rounds of role playing. Maybe that is actually workshopping how to apply an new account plan approach or something like that. But it's asking what would they actually do to apply this, and then what would it look like to bring that into our space and take up more time than maybe we would normally allow.
Yeah. Another thing that comes to mind when we're speaking about like sort of participants, like their buy-in and their reaction to it, I wonder, it seems to me that you can somewhat hide in a high level theory course. And not that people want to hide, but hopefully that you get the context of my question. But here, like it's almost, I can't figure out the right word, whether it's stress or risk, because this is real life. What you're playing with is real life. So there's a heightened awareness, maybe, is what I'm wondering if people don't feel that a little bit.
Yeah, I think what you're alluding to is there is more risk when people bring problems to bear. So in that example I've alluded to a few times when we were teaching people about the new sales competencies and mindsets, we actually asked people to bring problem accounts that they were going to workshop.
Okay.
Which there is more risk when you're asking people to do that. And so we really intentionally tried to create some psychological safety and even say it out loud that, you may or may not know the people you're in a group with, because we tried to mix verticals and mix teams, but name, the type of space you wanted to create. And you're calling people to a bit more. But like any good seller or sales enablement professional, you're anchoring it in what the salesperson cares about. Hey, we're calling you to more because we actually want you to drive your business forward more. We want you to make more money. We want the company to do better, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what it's going to look like. And I think most people hear that and appreciate you trying to create a space where you can help them.
Yeah. And you got it too. That's what I was getting to, is like thinking about, I didn't realize it until you said it, but making it safe enough to take the risks and bring in a bad deal or a problem deal or talk about this stuff publicly. It's way more, but I think that tension, I'm trying to think of myself sitting there. I think that would have me more checked in. That tension. Would make me check. You also said something too about, and you alluded to it a moment ago, that this is messier than just rolling out the course. Talk about, you started touching on it a moment ago, but add some detail to that. How is it messier?
So we've done this in a few ways when we're working on things like account plans, or we are rolling out sales competencies or other things like that. When you bring people into a group to workshop something that's real, using what you just taught them and using some, we give guardrails in the conversation so that they're applying some of the things we've talked about. But you can't control the conversations as much, unless you're in a smaller enablement function where maybe you're working with a group of 5 or 10 people. Maybe you can, but in my world, there's 500 to 1,000 sellers in any given initiative we're doing, right? They're bigger scale, and you just can't control what exactly they cover. And so the time and where we invest is less in like designing preset structures, but we invest in how are we building guardrails, how are we checking and pulsing into conversations or getting feedback on how conversations went. And you're like kind of like catering and maybe sensing how the conversations and the momentum of the sessions going, more than did we hit every single case study point,
Right.
right? And I think that's inherently more messy and more unknown. And I actually had some when I did this for the very first time, I had some pushback from a stakeholder to be like, well, why don't we just do this approach where we know exactly what they're
Right.
going to hit, and we
Right.
can tell everyone, hey, they've done these 3 things for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
this might be stating the obvious, but it just became obvious to me as you were speaking that there are trainers who do a certain thing, and then there are facilitators. This is pure facilitation. I don't mean to lead the witness here, but the people who are in front of the room doing this, would you say that's an emphasis? Like their skills are really key for this messy environment.
Yeah, I think any enablement person can gain the skills to train people, to like
Yes.
deliver knowledge and instruction, to deliver slides, to teach. And any person can build facilitation skills. And I think about facilitation skills, I think about it, you're holding a space or a container for conversation to happen, for learning to happen, for change to happen. So you're aware. And when you're teaching and training, you're doing that as well, but when
Yeah.
you remove some of the teaching and training and you allow more messy conversations, a little bit more unplanned conversations, the amount of holding the space, I think that increases. And it is a skill to know how to hold the tension, let things flow a bit, pull it back together when you need to, right? If people start getting off track, people started not following our liberating structures sequencing of conversations that we had set out. And we had to be like, hey, you're starting to go into this part of the workshop, but we want to ask you to stay at this stage for now and
Yeah.
then move to that later, right? So there's a little bit of that sensing and holding the space, which I think is a really important skill, but it's a little different than delivering,
Yeah.
delivering slides.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And I have done both. And the facilitation I think is more fun, but it's inherently, I don't want to say harder, maybe more complex. It's a different skill set. And yeah, you hit on it.
Yeah.
I also wonder in sort of the old model, there's a lot of companies where it's like we're going to teach you this theoretical stuff up front, and then we're going to rely on your frontline manager to then put it in context
Yeah.
and pull it through. So what is the role of the frontline managers? Because you're going right to in context. So how are you engaging with them during these sessions?
Yeah, it's such a good question. There's not one answer. And we're not going right to context. I do want to say, I know you would say affirm this, but I just want to say it for listeners. Like, we're teaching people, we're educating.
Yeah.
I am an instructional designer as well as an enablement professional. So there is some rigor there, but we're just trying to move to in context as fast as possible. And I think there's a bunch of different ways you can enable frontline managers. If they're in the sessions, it's encouraging them to engage and to learn and to grapple alongside of people. If they're not in the sessions, you're setting them up with resources to understand what people have done and how to continue to hold those spaces moving forward. Sometimes there's guides or one pagers to do that. Sometimes, what's happened, moving from our last push last year with that sales competency workshop, and is people started wanting to hold those peer consultation sessions organically in different team meetings and things like that. So one of my teammates would actually jump into some of those sessions with the frontline manager and their team to like kick it off, set the stage, and let them run with it. So there's a lot of ways you support frontline managers. They're always asked to do too many things.
Yes.
And, I think you said in another one of your sessions, we expect them to be sales coaches in addition to sales managers. And it's a hard ask. So, there's
Yeah.
many other episodes people could probably have on that.
Yeah. No, but it is interesting too, because I have talked to folks who are like, well, we're training our frontline sales managers how to coach. And it's like that, they might be better coaches, but they don't have time to use those skills. It's just the reality. I've interviewed 60 people in the last year, and this comes up over and over again. So anyway, you're right.
Yeah.
That's a whole other session
Yeah.
we could spend time on. But the reason I wanted to talk to you today is because I believe this is, maybe one could think it's subtle, but I think it's a huge shift. This 90-10, 10-90 to say, okay, we're going to do some learning, and then boom, we're going to run an actual facilitated workshop versus a training event. It's a big shift. And I think about it in my previous life, I ran a negotiation training and consulting firm, and we spent a lot of time
Yeah.
teaching people how to negotiate. And the transition that you make, it's like, how do you negotiate snap value versus this competing alternative to achieve these commercial terms, which is a whole level different than how to negotiate, if that makes sense. That's where I feel like you're
Yeah.
going.
Yeah, that gap from how do you negotiate to like how do you actually handle a negotiation with a customer value in a real instance, that gap's huge.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't make it, which is where, you hear so many people get on stump speeches about training being ineffective or, not actually being applied, which is
Yeah.
real. It's a hard thing, a hard nut to crack. And yeah, no silver bolts coming from me, but it's something that we're doing to grow. And I actually think we didn't ever hit on the change management piece, but I
Yes.
do think, when we talk about having people apply what we're learning to their real jobs and doing real work, it really assists in the change management piece of our programs as well. And I think that's just really important to call out that we're not just thinking about pure learning and enablement. We're often thinking about the change journey that we're having groups of people go on to acquire new skills or take on new processes. And so when you're bringing that wrestling we talked about
Yes.
into the enablement space, you're also curating a space for people to start to move along that change curve, whatever model you want to look at. There's a bunch I could list, but that's really an important facet you're trying to do as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like it's the change, the front level of change is happening in the workshop. Not versus you have to leave the
Yeah.
workshop and then go change your behaviors. It's like that is the first level that's happening right now, which I think is probably what would make it feel very personal to people because they are literally should be
Yeah.
changing behaviors right there. Yeah, it's
And
cool.
you could invite objections in the
Yes.
moment because someone's just tried it. And then you can create a space to be like, how was that? And people can start to air their grievances about that would block their change journey. You could start engaging that right away. And once again, every context, classroom, audience size, they're all going to impact how you could actually execute against this. But it starts to create space for that, which is really, really important.
Yeah, it's interesting. A couple years ago, Jim Dickey, who founded Chief Sales Officer Insights, said to me, we got on the subject of strategy to tactics, and he said, a new strategy is announced at SKO, and maybe even compensation has changed, appropriately to reflect moving to selling this new value prop or new solution, whatever, and then everybody goes back and sells the old thing. And one of his theories about that, I think, was that people don't want words coming out of their mouth to sell this new thing for the first time in front of a customer. So one of the reasons they go back to selling the old thing is they know it's less risky. And I just made this connection between something he said to me a couple of years ago and now that this allows them to have the words come out of their mouth a couple times
Yeah.
in a reasonably safe environment, certainly much more safe than in front of the customer. So yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
So it's the way you put it so good. And if I could just share with people some really fundamental learnings I've had in my journey that helped me start to
Yeah.
apply real good change management expertise into enablement. One is William Bridges' Transitions book. Individual transitions are much different than organizational changes. People transition on different cadences and flows versus how you like help an organization change policies and structures and systems. And so to think about individual transitions and how you can help that in your programs, I think it's just been a huge unlock for me. So
It's interesting. This is a fun note to end on. But anybody who hasn't read Transition by Bridges, and it is pretty funny, by the way, that a guy named Bridges wrote a transition book. But right,
I never thought about that.
yo, yeah. I was a Fortune 50 VP, and I really wanted to be an independent consultant, and I shared a 3-hour flight with a independent contractor woman, and we were talking, and I wanted to do what she did, and she said to me at the end of the flight, "You're not afraid of your ability to be successful in the new world. You're afraid of the change and unsure
Yeah.
about what that that middle part looks like." And she turned me on to Transition by Bridges. So
Yeah.
I fundamentally agree. It's one of the better things I've ever read on change management, and this is cool. I think I really believe that this is this is kind of, it's a movement, and it's where we need to be going more. And I think you're at the front end of it. And I appreciate you're a very fact-based, rational dude. And I appreciate that. Like, you're giving us really good, no, yeah, I feel like you're giving us a really good picture of like what works, what doesn't, and how people react to it.
Good.
And yeah, I think it's a good one for people who haven't started this journey yet to listen today. So really appreciate your time a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to have the conversation. So thanks for having me, and hopefully it's helpful for anyone listening.
Thanks.